Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom. We're going to pick right where we left off in class, and we're going to talk about absolutism in France, right? We're mainly focusing on the exploits of one particular king that, of course, is going to be the guy that took over when he was 4 years old, and he was a chunky little fat toddler and stuff like that. Of course, we're talking about Louis XIV, right? So we spent a lot of time in the class the last couple days talking a lot about, like, Louis XIII, his dad, talking about Cardinal Richelieu and stuff like that. Speaking of Cardinal Richelieu and some of his biggest fans, I've got two assistants here today that are going to help me explain a couple of concepts, and they are AP Euro veterans, and they have a lot of big suggestions that they could probably help you out with. So at any point, if you ever need advice, just go see these two people.
Hi, I'm Angelina.
And I'm Morgan.
And you're watching Mr. Terry's Flip.
Yes, so thank you very much, Angelina and Morgan. They're going to be helping me explain some really big stuff. They got a big famous quote that they're going to drop in the middle of this, and also Angelina is obsessed with a rap song and stuff like that when it comes to this like entire thing. It'll help you study for all this, but we'll get all that later, right? So like I said, we're going to pick right back up on Louis XIV, right? So we discussed how Anne of Austria, his mom, is going to be one of the most prominent and important leaders of that entire era, right? His mom is, of course, going to be dating apparently a cardinal as well, but not Cardinal Richelieu, the other guy that came after the fact, Cardinal Mazarin. So Cardinal Mazarin is, of course, going to be like the chief minister and things like that of Louis XIV when he's very, very young. And Anne of Austria is going to be much more of the pants-wearing person in this relationship. And also, they might have been hooking up on the side, but we're not positive. So the thing about it, though, is Anne of Austria is going to help sign the Treaty of Westphalia. She's going to bring an end to the French phase of the 30 Years' War, and she's going to try to set her son up for progress going forward. Now, another big thing that we talked about in class was, of course, the time that those sword and robe nobles got together and tried to kill this little chunky little guy right here, right? So we talked about the Fronde rebellions, right, or the Fronde rebellions. Fronde, of course, named after people who used to huck mud at carts and poor people and like street people and stuff like that. But the big thing was it was caused by the fact that we have this very, very young, impetuous king, right? We have this very young, little itty-bitty baby, little fat king and stuff like that on the throne. And so the robe nobles and the sword nobles believed that it was their chance to strike and really a couple small wars that would have been localized mostly in Paris and would have been able to actually get to him, possibly kill him. And like we talked about in class, he feigned sleeping one time and was actually able to avoid death. But he does stay alive, and the Fronde rebellions are considered a massive non-success or a massive failure on the noble side of things. But one of the biggest, what's the word I'm looking for here? Effects of the Fronde rebellions is going to be the effect on Louis's personal views and feelings of the nobles of the robe and the nobles of the sword. And it has to do with the fact that he does not trust them anymore. He doesn't trust them, he hates them actually, and that's why he decides to build his house 13 miles outside of Paris, which we'll get to that house here in about 2 seconds. But how are we going to go from that little toddler to this guy, right? Louis XIV in his glory right here, right? Louis XIV wearing, of course, the fleur-de-lis robes, the entire, excellence in his entire, what's the word I'm looking for here? Just expensive and very, very gaudy, sense of purpose in this, his big wig and his pomp and circumstance. Now, speaking of pomp and circumstance, Louis XIV, looking at this picture, it's very important that you understand it really symbolizes very well his arrogance, right? His intensity and why he is considered the chief absolutist of this entire area. When we start off by talking about absolutism, we always start off by talking about Louis XIV, because Louis XIV is the absolutist. He's the guy when you're talking about absolutism. And he also is, of course, the person who your state is named after, right? Louisiana is named after him, okay? Not him and his wife. That's a bad rumor. It's not important. But also, he's obsessed with his legs. And we'll talk about that a little bit, later on, why and stuff like that. He's obsessed with his legs because he was a trained ballet dancer and stuff like that. And also, a big thing about it as well is he was the very first one to actually make high heels fashionable for men because they made his what look better? His legs look better, right? So the thing about it, though, going forward, he was also known as the Sun King, right? He's very well known as the chief absolutist, but the big thing we got to figure out when we're looking at this is how did he do this? How was he able to pull off the ascension to power that he pulled off? The guy that comes to power and he just busts out his legs in every single little picture that he takes, but also the guy that was able to come to power and be an absolutist of all absolutists, the man that literally changed political dynamics in Europe going forward. So, a big thing, the place to start out is, after you're looking at the progression of it, is he really only did 6 things, but he did them consistently enough that he actually is going to change the dynamics of political and social and economic development in Europe going forward for the next 100 years. So first and foremost, the big thing he wants to do is he wants to divide the robe and the sword nobles against each other, right? So what he wants to do is figure out a way and a method where he wants to pick one of these two nobilities and decide which one of them is going to be the one that he wants to support him, right? So really quickly when you're looking at it, Big thing he does is he starts electing a lot of new nobles, right? He starts filling his court and stuff like that with some lesser nobles and having them, like, actually buy their way into the, like, excuse me, into his prevalence and into his realm a little bit quicker. Now, another big thing about it as well is why would he pick the Robe nobles over the Sword nobles in the first place? A lot of it has to do with tradition, and also a lot of it has to do with his ability to manipulate. Now, the Robe nobles, their life is dependent, and their title is dependent on the king. They had to buy their way in, and it can be taken away from them if they actually, like, committed certain crimes, or if the king felt at any point that it needed to be ripped away from their family. So the big thing he decides is he wants to figure out a way to make the Robe nobles dependent on him, so they will hate the Sword nobles and prevent any kind of Frond rebellions from ever happening again. Another big one that he does is he wants to build his famous palace. Known as what, ladies? What's the palace that he built?
Palace of Versailles.
Thank you. Very good. They're not even looking at the screen right now, and they remember that from 2 years ago. That's a 4 and a 3 sitting back there right now. That's what they got on that AP Euro test, right? So, like, not like out of 10, you know what I mean? Like a 4 and a 3. Like, both of them passed. They both did really well. They're both, like, very good AP scholars. Like, so, like, now, look, really, really quick, though. Big thing about it, though, is let's talk about the Palace of Versailles, right? Before we go any further, let's discuss the architectural style it's built in. It is built in what is known, it starts with a B. Do y'all remember that one? Do you remember that one? What was the architectural style? It starts with a B. It's Baroque, yeah. Because the big thing about it is if it's not Baroque, don't fix it. Nobody? It's from no, it's from Beauty and the Beast. It's from this little joke right here.
And as I always say, if it's not Baroque, don't fix it.
So, like, yeah, exactly. Like, so the big thing about it, though, is it's built in Baroque style architecture, which we'll talk about a little bit more at the end of this and stuff like that, but that is the art trend that actually followed Mannerism in the late Renaissance, right? It's kind of a return to glory of Catholic faith and Catholicism, and also, like, a big showing of wealth, and it moved into a big transition, and it was used to kind of decorate palaces and these big adornments. But this bad boy right here, this overview is the Palace of Versailles. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and it's literally a place that I want to go to so badly. It's, like, so high on my list. I have to go there before I die. It's a really big deal. And apparently, it's 3 different like stories, and it's over 700 different rooms with over 2,000 pieces of furniture. And these fountains, y'all, these fountains in the back are the size of football fields. Football fields. Like, we're talking about 2 football field-sized fountains in his backyard, right? Like, so it's absolutely majestic. It's magical. It's Baroque. It's huge. And it's built 13 miles outside of Paris. Why would he do this? Why would he turn a hunting lodge that was there at first into this massive palace complex that if you walk every single floor, you will end up walking close to 3 miles, right? Why would he do this? What would be the point? Well, a lot of it has to do with his safety and that political idea of robe versus sword nobility, right? Placing himself further out on the outskirts will make him less susceptible to attack, right? Now, this right here is a very Baroque piece of architecture, and when it comes to the architectural elements of this entire palace, and that is the front gate that you actually walk through to get inside of the Palace of Versailles. As you can see, everything is gilded, right? He has gilded roofs. He's got gold all over everything. And it is an absolutely gorgeous relic that sits with us every single day and is also today owned by the modern French government, right? Now, the other big thing about it, though, as well, when we're looking at this palace, this right here is his bedroom. Louis XIV's bedroom, when it was redesigned, was actually on this wing right here when you would enter in. He was on the top floor on this side, okay? So the thing about it, though, is, as you can tell, his bedroom was magnificent. It was huge, it was large, it was massive, and anywhere close to, I think it's like 15,000 people can fit inside of Versailles at any given moment. And guess what? 15,000 people lived with him at any other point throughout the year while he was living inside of this palace, right? Now, why would he do this? Why would he have this magnificent bedroom and then 700 different rooms and, like, let all these 15,000 people, like, live with him at any given moment? Because he wanted everything about their lives to revolve around him. Going from when he woke up in the morning in this bedroom to when he went to sleep at night, right? Their entire daily schedule revolved around Louis XIV. What was, like, Morgan, what did they do when he woke up, Morgan? They clapped for him when he woke up in the morning. They're like, "Oh, sir, welcome from your slumber. Oh, we love you." One of the biggest jobs you could have in Louis XIV's court was helping him pick out the shirt that he was going to wear that day, or helping him go to the what, Angelina? Helping him go where? To the what? To the bathroom, yeah. Helping him go to the bathroom was considered like literally a really big job. Like their entire lives depended on him, right? And whenever he would walk down the stairs, they would just clap for him, right? Because their entire livelihood depended on him in this giant palace. Because let's be honest, y'all, if you were a robe noble, wouldn't you want to live in this palace rather than just like some chateau on the outskirts of Paris? 100%, right? So their entire lives revolved around him from when he woke up to when he went to bed. And this right here, that is the queen's bedroom, right? Now, the other big thing is some of you are like, I like that one better. It's prettier. Well, looking at this picture and stuff like that, why is it important to understand that he has a bedroom and she has a bedroom? Well, due to the fact that he wanted to be able to basically do whatever he wanted with whoever he wanted whenever he wanted, right? So when we're getting at that, he actually had paid mistresses that lived at Versailles with him. That's how much power this guy had. That his wife had to be understanding that he had paid mistresses that lived in apartments inside of Versailles with them. That is wild, y'all. It's crazy. And this right here, that is his most favorite of rooms in the entire Palace of Versailles. It is known as the Hall of Mirrors, right? The Hall of Mirrors was this massive, like expanse that was extremely tall. And what are you doing back there?
Hall of Mirrors, tall and wide.
Tall and wide, yep.
Nobles flock to my bedside.
Oh, nobles do flock to his bedside. Who's out there now?
I said certified king. Look at all this bling. It's a new place. I run up debts like a credit card. Take a tour. Come on inside. The Hall of Mirrors. It's tall and wide. Nobles flock by my bedside. Asking favors I won't provide.
All right, so anyway, yes, like we said, nobles flock to your bedside or whatever and stuff like that. The Hall of Mirrors, though, could hold 2,000 people. And it was in grand Baroque architecture with the ceilings painted with chandeliers that cost more than most of our yearly salaries. Well, y'all don't get a yearly salary, but that's neither here nor there. So when we're looking at it as well, is he wanted this massive Hall of Mirrors, so when he arrived to his court parties fashionably late, everyone's heads would be turned towards him, right? His throne sat in the middle, and the Hall of Mirrors becomes a very important room, even also going forward in the progression, because Germany became a country inside that room. Now, looking at the outside as well, as you can see, it's just absolutely beautiful. I gotta go to Versailles at some point in my life. I absolutely have to go. And this right here is the private theater that he developed for himself, because he would actually force the nobles to watch him perform his ballets. And in one of those ballets in particular, he was literally playing the god Apollo, right? And when he played the god Apollo, after that, they began to refer to him as the Sun King, bestowing light upon his people, right? And I have right here a clip from the show Versailles that actually shows him literally walking up and then dancing in a very weird and awkward way and stuff like that. But literally all the nobles had to do was just watch and applaud because they had no ability to say anything else. So as you can tell, a big part of this is his creation of his royal court, right? Now the royal court aspect is hard to explain, but what that is basically it was a party every single night. And the royal court were the robe nobles that sucked up to him all the time, that did whatever he told them to, that passed whatever taxes and did everything he was supposed to do, right? We'll explain it more in class because it is a little bit hard to explain. But the big thing about it, though, is he also created even more robe nobles. He did not just use the ones that were around during the Fronde rebellions, because some of them had actually made such bad relationships with him, he didn't want them around anymore. And what is he going to do? Establish this rulership from Versailles where other people are going to live with him that are closer to him, right? Now, another big thing that's going to go around as well, when he creates more robe nobles, he also hires new advisors. Some of them even came from outside the nobility. Some of them were wealthy middle-class members. Some of them were foreigners as well that came in that actually advised him on different economic practices. And one of them that's very famous is a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Colbert, which we will talk about here in a second, right? Now, the other big thing that he does as well is he makes noble power and salary completely dependent on him. If you lived with him in Versailles, then he would actually make sure that you got paid appropriately, that you received more land and title, and that you received more like tax cuts, tax breaks, and also were immune to taxation. And if you decided that you wanted to leave in a huff or not stay with him at Versailles, well, he would cut you off, right? He made their entire livelihood in essence dependent on him, right? And then literally this right here is another great look at his noble court, right? Look at the royal court right here. All of these members of the nobility dressed in their robes arriving to watch Louis, the Sun King himself, with his legs on display, like standing at the top of this banister of stairs with a sword noble kneeling in front of him, probably coming to discuss the powers of his military, because Louis's military was also gigantic, right? Getting rid of Protestants was another big thing that Louis wanted to do as well. Cardinal Richelieu set the tone with his storming and berating and barrage of La Rochelle. A big thing about it is that the Edict of Nantes didn't really stop any kind of persecution of Protestants, that document written by Henry IV. The big thing that is going to happen, though, is Louis XIV comes along and he revokes that Edict of Nantes, right? Chops it up, shreds it up, and says, oh, it is open season on Protestants. And he decides to start persecuting them heavily, effectively, and aggressively, right? And so with that, though, he's going to start hunting them down, closing Protestant schools, burning Protestant churches, and doing all this other big stuff, right? And another big thing is he wanted to try and make as much money as possible for one particular reason, which we'll talk about here in about 2 seconds, right? But he adopted an economic concept known as mercantilism, right? Now, this all led to him being such an eminent figure, such a famous figure in and of himself, that he is well known for one particular quote, right? The way the story goes is that one of his courtiers, right, one of the members of his royal court, one of those advisors, walked up to him one day and they were like, Sir, the affairs of the state. The people are starving. Our wars are going on long. We are running out of money. Sir, what should we do about the state? And literally they cut him off. And what Louis screamed back at him was,
I am the state.
Okay, not yet. I'm going to
I am the state.
Okay, you're just doing it. All right, anyway.
I am the state.
That's what he yelled back at them, right? This whole thing like, I am the state, as like Morgan and Angelina did so effectively, right? It is literally something that all of you should just get tattooed on your face, because literally it will make you remember Louis XIV for forever. Look, if you're going to have a rap song about him, you better like have some tats somewhere. Tom Ritchie doesn't, that's why he's lame. Now anyway, so look, big thing about it though as well is that quote drives forward his entire ideas and his whole persona, right? Even though ironically enough, he probably never actually said it. But like that's completely different, right? The embellishments sometimes are the big ways to actually remember all the stuff about these people, right? Then the other big thing though that we talked about 2 seconds ago, this adoption of mercantilism. Well, let's go a little bit further with that. Let's talk a little bit more about what mercantilism is, okay? It's very important that you understand what it is. So Jean-Baptiste Colbert, one of his financial advisors that was actually outside the nobility originally, and he brings him in, was an advisor and one of the intendants that whenever he wanted to supersede the parlements and go over them, he would communicate with people like Jean-Baptiste Colbert, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is Jean-Baptiste Colbert teaches Louis XIV how to apply mercantilistic policy, right? So mercantilistic or mercantilism is the definition of an economic system of regulations that tries to make as much money for the national government as possible, right? They want to try and hoard resources as much as possible, because back in the day, literally, money was in physical metals, right? Precious metals like silver and gold and things like that. Precious metals that literally, if it got outside of your country, it's now in the economy of another country, right? So mercantilism is the idea of trying to keep all of it as much as possibly as you can and having more than your next door neighbor, right? And so the idea is, though, with mercantilism, things do need to be bought. So how do you do this? With mercantilism, you must buy local products only. Like French people were supposed to buy things from France. And how are they going to do this, or how are they going to stop you from buying products from other places? Well, they're going to tax the bananas out of them, right? And those taxes on imports are called what? Y'all remember that? Taxes on imports starts with T. Tariffs. Very, very nice. Good job, Angelina. Very nice. Tariffs were these massive taxes on imports to try and discourage you from actually like buying other items. Yo, I don't have cue cards. They just remember all this stuff. And that was 2 years ago. Now, like looking at this as well, though, they wanted more gold, more silver, and really big taxes on imports, right? Because they want to try and keep all that money inside the country. Well, the thing about it is, did this make a lot of money for Louis? Yes, it did. Did Jean-Baptiste Colbert's advice make tons of money for Louis? Yes, it did, right? Well, what is Louis going to then turn around and spend all that money on? Well, he's going to spend it on himself, right? He spent it on building the Palace of Versailles, and he spent it on doing the one thing that he loved doing more than anything else, which is going to war, right? He loved spending on, like, war. What'd you say, Angelina? Oh, because, like, you've heard this all before? Like, so, yeah, now, look. So the big thing about it, though, is he loved spending it on war, right? He loved to be referred to as the conqueror by his people, right? He lived to be the ripe old age of about 74, okay? Louis XIV actually lived for quite some time. He was one of the longest reigning monarchs that existed in European history. And he lived all the way up until 1715. He took the throne at 1643. It was absolutely crazy. And so when you're looking at it, he was also at war for 33 out of his 54 years of being in power, right? 54 years. 54 years. Like his 54-year reign, 33 of them, he was at war, right? He created a professional army with standards and uniforms and regulated guns and rations and all these other different items. And Louis's model for his army was imitated all over Europe with fantastic outfits and really, really intense like pageantry. But we talked about that a lot in class, right? So if you need to go ahead and pause this real quick and jot the rest of this stuff down, you just need to know that Louis loved to go to war. But one war in particular that he was well known for was a war known as the War of Spanish Succession. The War of Spanish Succession, as literally both the girls in the back just like mouthed at me because they just remembered it off the top of their heads. The war, it was the biggest war that Louis ever went through, and it was from 1701 to 1713. 2 years before he died is when it actually ended, right? And so the big thing about it is, why did this war happen? Well, it all goes back to those goofy old Spanish Habsburgs that wouldn't stop hooking up with their cousins, right? So the King of Spain died, right? Yeah, incest is not the best, okay? Incest is not the best at all. It's gross. It leads to you having children that look like this. Ew! And it's really, really gross. And they have jacked up jaws. And this guy right here, Carlos II, Charles II, as we call him in English, was the last Habsburg king of Spain. And he couldn't walk. His jaw was so big he couldn't talk until he was 8 and he just drooled all the time, and he couldn't walk until he was 4, right? So the big thing though is that he died childless, so rule passed to Louis's grandson named Philip, right? Louis's grandson Philip was only on the throne because Louis's family had married some of their daughters off to the Spanish Habsburgs as peace treaties following the 30 Years' War, right? So his grandson is now coming to power because his daughter was that child's mom, right? So looking at this though, that means, wait a second, King Louis's child, very young Philip grandson is in power? Does that mean that Louis might be able to manipulate colonies and money and land growth and things like that? Heck yeah, it does. It's not like Louis, I am the state, the Sun King, is just going to sit there on his butt and just be like, oh, I don't want to take anything now. He's going to try and take everything. He tried to claim land and colonies and money, and war will ensue. Because the other European powers were disgusted by this. They were like, we are not going to allow this guy, this Sun King guy, to try and take all this power, right? So the English, the Dutch, the Austrians, the Prussians, and all of them united against Louis, right? And the big thing about it is Louis actually lost, right? Louis lost this war because the rest of Europe decided we are not about to let the balance of power be tipped. Remember the 30 Years' War? Cardinal Richelieu funded a Protestant army even though he was Catholic because of the balance of power, right? Everyone in Europe and all these European countries wanted to try and keep the balance of power, to try and make sure there was an even playing field for all of these larger countries to fight against one another, right? So the English, Dutch, and Austrians and Prussians, when they unite against Louis, he ends up losing, and he actually goes into a pretty significant amount of debt, right? Now, looking at that, though, this whole war was kind of brought to a close by a document known as the Peace of Utrecht, right? Utrecht was a city in the Netherlands, and what this document and what the end of this war is going to do is kind of unofficially set limits on the expansion of European powers. What it's going to do is kind of create a standard and a tradition that if anybody tries to take too much power, the rest of Europe will ally together and actually push them back, right? So, with that, though, France is going to lose a lot of territory. They lost territory in North America, Canada, they lost the Strait of Gibraltar in Spain, and the rulership is going to pass to Philip V, his grandson, right? And France was left in a tremendous amount of debt, following all of Louis' spending. And ironically enough, the rulership of Louis XIV is going to kind of set up a lot of financial disparity, helping lead to his great-grandson, Louis XVI, losing control and the French Revolution starting, right? And so with that, though, also checking out this map, as you can tell, all these guys united together to push Louis and his armies back because they didn't like the idea that he was playing too much powerful Sun King-like throne stuff inside of Spain. Get it? Like Game of Thrones and everything. So the big thing about it, though, is with Louis spending, his finances are going up in flames. But the way that Louis looked at it, he was like, look, I can't take this money with me, so I might as well spend it on stuff that I like. But is he going to set up a rulership for his grandson, Louis XV, in a bad way? Yes. And will then his great-grandson, Louis XVI, have it even worse? 110%, right? But going forward, we got two other little things to talk about, and then we're going to be able to move forward. The thing about it is we got to focus on also, speaking of Spain, let's chat about Spain real quick, right? Spain was having a massive decline in power. Oh, by the way, Louis would die of an infection, a gangrene infection, in a certain location that we'll discuss in class because I don't want to put it on the internet. So we'll discuss that a little bit later on. But he died of a gangrenous infection when a surgeon tried to actually operate on him and stuff like that when he was younger. But the big thing about it, though, in the long run, is when that happens, he is going to die in 1715, and he's going to leave rulership to his grandson, Louis XV, right? Now, going forward, though, Spain's power is going to decline dramatically as well. Now, when we left off with Spain, we knew that they had tons of colonies in North America, tons of colonies in South America, and it's just so ironic that this one group that was so powerful in the 1500s is going to have a massive decline in power during the 1600s, right? And a lot of this has to do with the decline in trade, okay? So 60% of their trade declined because their colonies were going to start trading with other markets, right? The English and the Dutch start up, literally the English and Dutch East India companies, and they also start commandeering the spice trade, right? And so what ends up happening is Spanish influence in the trade market is beginning to go down because it's being usurped by English and Dutch traders, right? The encomienda system is also killing off a massive amount of Native Americans, leading to them to invest in an African-based slave system that is going to further bankrupt them, and it's also going to further set up a plantation economy that's not sustainable, right? And also, the mines are beginning to dry up. The gold and the silver is beginning to run out. But here's the problem. They had so much gold and silver up front that rushed into the economy, it caused a massive amount of inflation, okay? So next to drying mines, put hyperinflation. The Spanish currency became hyperinflated, and royal debt is beginning to go up because they're beginning to fight a lot of these wars with other people like the Spanish War of Secession, or also like different wars with the French and the English over colonial holdings and things like that. So royal debt is going up. So what they had to do was continually devalue their money in order to pay off debts. For example, this is the devaluation of money. Spain's currency used to be based in silver and in gold under Philip, and then later on they start basing it in copper, a much cheaper metal and things like that, to try and basically pass these off as equal amounts. But the problem is that everyone in Europe is aware that this currency has been devalued. So inflation begins to run away. And then also the problem is when the government tried to fix everything, they had a huge issue on their hands. That the Spanish were already kind of like very extravagant in society, and they had like huge parties and massive influence, and so they kind of devalued hard work, right? They literally looked upon middle-class work and hard work as a disgusting thing that was too good for them, and so a lot of them began to enter the church rather than actually entering into labor or joining up with guilds, right? And another thing is they just kept losing war after war. So what's going to happen to their currency and to their economy is it's going to massively overinflate. As you can see with this entire chart right here, their rate of inflation was almost 2 times as high as the rate of Florence, which is what led to the decline of the Medici family, and it's literally almost 3 times as high as the rate there of actually London and also some other like areas as well, including Amsterdam. Now, what about the Austrians, right? So we've got absolutism in Austria as well. But the big thing about it that all you need to know about the Austrians is that the 30 Years' War hurt the Habsburgs. They were defeated and exhausted. The Austrian Habsburgs were the ones that had controlled the Holy Roman Empire. So instead of actually focusing anymore on the Holy Roman Empire, the Austrians decided to just focus on the Austria instead and growing the Habsburg monarchy, right? So the big thing is they're just like, you know what? I don't really need the Holy Roman Empire. It's beginning to die anyway, right? So that's a big thing that you need. If you want to pause this and just jot that down, that's completely fine. But I'm trying to keep...
Hey guys, what's up? So yeah, I'm back in my house right now, and it's really early in the morning. It's like 7:15 in the morning, and my entire family's like asleep. So the big thing about it is I can't scream, but I have one more slide to show you real fast. It's going to take like 2 seconds, and I know this flip's been really crazy. Like that last slide, all you had to do was say Austria was like, to the Holy Roman Empire and wanted to focus on Austria instead, and the Habsburgs were like, Holy Roman Empire sucks. Austria rules all. So the big thing about it, though, is now I'm so excited to announce this for Sophie Panzavecchia because I know she's so interested because we're going to start talking about absolutism in Russia. The big thing about it that you need to understand is that a lot of this hinges on some of the early Russian history, right? There was this guy named Ivan III who's going to be the very first like major Russian leader to set up the ability for an absolutist czar to come to power, right? Because he ruled over this place called Muscovy. And Muscovy is basically like Moscow, but if Moscow was just like a kingdom. And as you don't know already, Moscow is a city in Russia. It's Russia's biggest city and oldest city and stuff like that. Maybe not biggest city. St. Petersburg might be a little bit bigger. But spoiler alert, alert. We're going to talk about St. Petersburg later. And so the big thing about it, though, is that Ivan III led over this region called Muscovy, and then there was these people known as the Mongols, right? And so the Mongolians used to control all this territory, including all of Russia as well. But Ivan III helps break away just a little bit of it, and then they start pushing the Mongols back and basically start establishing an area that is just strictly like Russian by culture, right? By the way, there are a lot of Ivans in this, so I'm sorry if I start confusing you, but this whole thing starts in about the 1480s, right? So also, other big thing is, how does Ivan pull this off? How does he break a small area away from this giant Mongol empire and then start moving forward? Well, a big thing you got to understand is the Mongols were kind of crapping out a little bit, and they didn't really have that much strength or power left over. And ever since the death of Genghis Khan in the 1200s, there's subsequent leaders like Kublai Khan and stuff like that. The borders are going to begin to recede. But also because Ivan III convinced these people called the boyars, which are Russian nobles. We got robe nobles and sword nobles over in France. We got the boyars over in Russia, right? Kind of like the Boyardees, like Chef Boyardee. That stuff was fantastic. Loved it when I was a kid. The big thing about it, though, is Russian nobles, they're going to work with Ivan to copy a bunch of Mongol things. Because how is it possible that the Mongolians ruled an area this friggin' big? They must have been really smart. And they were. They had things like postal routes and censuses and taxes and efficient systems. And what Ivan III, along with the boyars, is going to do is basically just copy and paste those practices into this new fledgling Russia. But now what we're going to do is I'm going to let y'all sign off and let y'all go hang out for the rest of the weekend. But I'll see y'all when we see you in the next class or whatever. And we'll start talking about this guy named Ivan the Terrible. So anyway, we'll get to that a little bit later. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a great one.